Okay, let's just dive right in. No long intros today. We are looking at a moment that truly shook the U.S., the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And this isn't just about one tragic event. It's about the political machine he built, the incredibly fast investigation, and frankly, the national crackdown on speech that followed. It got intense.
Yeah, that's really the heart of it. Our mission here is to cut through all that noise. We've gone deep into the source documents, think subpoenaed deposition transcripts, actual police reports. We want to show you some, well, pretty major things many people got wrong right at the start. This is the KaiZen channel, right? We're all about constantly improving our understanding. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. And look, to keep you with us, here's a pop quiz. Utah Governor Spencer Cox, he went public saying the alleged assassin, Tyler Robinson, was deep into a leftist ideology. Okay, but what did Robinson's own grandmother say about the political affiliation of their entire family? We'll drop the answer at the end. It really challenges that whole official story.
It really does. So if you're ready to unpack this whole mess, get past the headlines, just pause for a sec, focus up, and write okay in the comments right now. Let us know you're with us on this.
All right, so before we even get to the crime, we have to understand who Charlie Kirk was, the sheer scale of his influence. He was only 31. And he built this, I mean, it really was a conservative political and media empire, bypassed college. Right?
No degree.
Right, no traditional path. It started young, like age 17. He wrote an essay about liberal bias in schools. Breitbart picked it up. Boom, he's on Fox Business. Instant conservative street cred. Then by 2012, he co-founds Turning Point USA, TPUSA. That became the engine.
And the money?
Ah,
Wow, the financial scale is just staggering. Once he aligned with Trump, things just took off. We look at the tax filings. TPUSA, technically a nonprofit, remember, was pulling in contributions over $79 million by 2022. That's not just growth. That's like an explosion.
Yeah, total explosion. And Kirk himself, as the guy running it all, he benefited hugely. The records show his own compensation jumped. It went from something like $27,000 early on.
Pretty modest start. Yeah, exactly. To over $400,000 by 2021. That kind of jump tells you just how crucial he became to the whole money-making operation. You know, it mirrored the organization's own financial success.
And what was driving all this money? The message wasn't exactly subtle. He was big on Christian nationalism, pushing it hard, especially towards young people, college kids. He specifically endorsed something called the Seven Mountains Mandate. Now, for listeners who maybe haven't heard that term, what exactly is that about?
Yeah, it's important to get this. It's not just Christian values in general. The Seven Mountains Mandate is a specific, pretty influential belief. It argues that Christians need to basically take back control of 7 key areas or mountains of society. The idea is that America should ultimately be governed by these Christian principles.
And those mountains are?
Media, government, education, economy, arts and entertainment, family, and religion. And you can see how TPUSA really hammered on education and government. Campuses were ground zero for them.
Yeah, okay. And he tied that into some really extreme takes on social issues, right? That kept him in the news constantly.
Oh, absolutely. Very uncompromising. His anti-LGBTQ views, for example, he publicly stated, you know, a man just can't become a woman, period. And his abortion stance was probably the most polarizing. He called it murder, pushed for total illegality. He even argued against exceptions for, like, a 10-year-old rape victim, said all conceived life has rights no matter the circumstances. That was his line.
Wow. Okay, so those strong stances defined his public persona. But you mentioned the source documents show maybe a contrast between that public confidence and his private legal moves, especially around January 6th.
Exactly. This is where we dig into those subpoenaed deposition transcripts.
Yeah.
From the House Select Committee looking into the Capitol attack.
Right. This part is fascinating because on the surface, it looked like he was cooperating. He handed over, what, over 8,000 pages of documents about bus arrangements for the rally?
That's right. And those documents confirmed the money trail, too. You had the public's heiress, Julie Fancelli, giving a huge amount, $1.25 million, to Kirk's groups, Turning Point Action, and TPUSA, specifically to fund buses for Jan 6.
Okay, so documents are flowing, but then he sits down for questioning.
And bam, hits the legal wall. Despite giving up all that paper when they actually asked him questions under oath, he repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination.
Hold on. If he handed over 8,000 pages, why plead the Fifth on? What kind of questions? Seems weird.
It does seem weird from the outside, but legally, it screams potential jeopardy. He wouldn't even answer if he was the founder or executive director of Turning Point USA, his own organization.
Seriously? Why refuse to answer that?
Well, taking the fifth means, legally speaking, that answering truthfully might incriminate you in a crime. It's a lawyer's move when they fear charges.
Right.
Refusing to confirm being the founder, it suggests he was trying to create legal distance between himself personally and whatever TPUSA or Turning Point Action did related to Jan 6. It's like saying, here's the paperwork, but I'm not saying anything that links me directly and could get me indicted.
Gotcha. Okay. What else did he plead the fifth on?
Also, questions about the rally budget. He said something like, I can't live by that budget. It's 6 days away, which sounds evasive. And critically, he refused to answer whether he used Telegram, the encrypted messaging app, to communicate about the rally.
Ah, using encrypted messages for planning around Jan 6th. Yeah, that would definitely raise flags about coordination, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And then you see this huge gap between the rhetoric and what actually happened on the ground. Remember, January 4th, Kirk tweets out this boast, saying TPUSA is sending 80-plus buses full of patriots to D.C., making it sound like this massive mobilization.
80-plus buses. Okay.
The reality,
Okay.
the final reports, they sent just 7 buses, about 350 students total.
Wow. 7. Down from 80. That's a massive difference.
Huge discrepancy.
Yeah.
It really highlights how much of the operation might have been, about the show, the PR, rather than the actual numbers or impact.
Yeah.
Spectacle over substance, maybe.
That difference really says a lot. 80 promised, 7 delivered. Okay. If you, listening right now, found those details about the Jan 6th deposition, pleading the fifth, if that surprised you, just reply 1 in the comments. Let us know. Okay, let's shift now. From the empire he built to the crime itself, the assassination. Kirk was in Orem, Utah. He was at Utah Valley University, UVU, for a TPUSA debate event.
Yeah, and UVU, just for context, is the biggest public college in Utah,
Yeah.
nearly 47,000 students. Big place. He was reportedly there to debate some really hot topics, gun violence, and the link conservatives often draw between trans individuals and mass shootings. The police called it a targeted attack right away, highly calculated.
And just chillingly precise, a single shot, fired from the rooftop of a nearby building, just 1 bullet. Imagine being there, the suddenness, the horror. A public figure killed instantly, a huge campus lockdown. He was rushed out in a private car, didn't make it, died at the hospital.
Yeah, total chaos ensued. UVU shut down the entire campus. All classes, activities, everything canceled until the following Monday. It paralyzed the place. The manhunt kicked off immediately. They used CCTV footage, tracking the shooter's movements from a grassy spot up to a parking garage roof, then fleeing into a neighborhood off campus.
And the FBI got involved quickly, putting up a big reward, right? $100,000. They wanted this guy fast.
They did. But the capture, it wasn't the reward that did it. It was the suspect's own family, Tyler J. Robinson. His family turned him in. Reports say he confessed to his father first. Just tragic.
Oh, wow. His own family. That's unimaginable.
And the evidence against Robinson piled up fast. His DNA matched samples from a towel found wrapped around the rifle, and also on a screwdriver found on the roof likely used to gain access. Pretty clear link.
Okay, so the physical evidence seems strong, but this is where the political story immediately got complicated.
Exactly. This is that key contradiction we mentioned at the start. Utah Governor Spencer Cox went public almost immediately. He stated Robinson had very different political views than those of his conservative family and was driven by a leftist ideology. Suggested he got radicalized after dropping out of Utah State.
Okay, so the governor puts out this leftist ideology narrative. That became the story.
It drove the whole conversation nationally. But then you look at what the family actually said. The sources include statements from his grandmother, and she painted a totally different picture. She said their entire family are Republicans. She didn't know a single Democrat in the family.
Wait, so the governor says leftist ideology, but the grandmother says entire family are Republicans.
Precisely. Total contradiction. Now, maybe Robinson himself held different views. Maybe he was an outlier. But the immediate official narrative pushed by the governor that he was a product of leftist radicalization was directly undercut by his own family's account of their political background.
That is a huge piece of context that got lost or ignored in the initial rush.
Okay, so regardless of the label, prosecutors are going for the death penalty against Robinson. What are the aggravating factors they're citing?
2 main ones, according to the state prosecutors in Utah. First, they argue he targeted Kirk specifically because of his political expression, making it an attack on free speech itself. And second, and this one is really chilling, they cite that he acted knowing that children would witness the assassination. They're arguing the intentional infliction of trauma on child witnesses is an aggravating factor. They clearly want to make an example out of this.
Wow, targeting political speech and knowing kids would see it. That's heavy. We need to pause here. Think about that family situation. Turning in your own son or grandson for something like this. If you can even begin to imagine that kind of impossible petition, pause this deep dive. Share your thoughts in the comments. What goes through your mind hearing about that?
Okay, so the crime happens, the suspect is caught, but in 2024, the crime scene instantly expands, right, to the digital world.
Instantly. It's the new reality. Before the police tape is even fully up, the violence is online. Videos of Kirk's assassination went viral immediately.
Yeah.
We're talking tens of millions of views on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, within just hours.
And how did the tech platforms handle that? Because that's always the question.
Huge differences. The sources show Meta, Facebook, and Instagram, they moved pretty quick. Applied labels, strong age restrictions, and you had to be 18 plus to even see the content. Try to contain it somewhat.
Okay, so Meta took action. What about X?
X, under Elon Musk, took a very different path. They leaned into this idea of a free flow of information, which basically meant those incredibly graphic, violent videos were just out there, widely available, often set to autoplay right in people's feeds. It created this kind of digital Wild West spectacle around his death.
A free flow of that kind of information. Wow. And predictably, that chaos bred misinformation.
Predictably and maliciously, the speed meant facts didn't stand a chance against political spin.
What was the worst piece of fake news that got out there?
Probably the most damaging was a report, and it was in the Wall Street Journal initially, citing a supposed ATF bulletin. This fake bulletin claimed bullet casings found at the scene had inscriptions related to transgender ideology.
Okay, that sounds explosive. Was it true?
Completely false.
Wow.
When the actual details came out later, there was nothing like that on the casings. But the journal report, while amended, wasn't fully retracted. So that toxic idea just hung out there.
And the fallout from that false report.
Immediate and scary. You saw Google searches for transgender ideology just spike. Conservative media, politicians, they jumped all over it. They used this false story to demand action, not just against the shooter, but against the whole trans community. Calls to ban pride flags, push legislation, all based on a debunked hoax.
So the misinformation directly fueled real-world targeting.
Absolutely, and it led to doxing. The digital mob went after innocent people almost instantly. Right-wing activists just started blasting photos and names online, falsely accusing random people.
Can you give an example? The human cost of that.
Yeah, the sources mentioned several. There was Sky Valadez, a trans musician, and another woman, Michaela from Seattle, also trans. Her photo was stolen, spread everywhere with the claim she was the shooter. She had zero connection to anything, Utah, Kirk, the crime. Nothing. She reported getting hundreds, literally hundreds of death threats, had to involve the FBI. It just shows how fast this stuff spreads and how powerless individuals are against that kind of online onslaught.
That's terrifying, just picked out of the blue based on prejudice.
Look, if you've ever seen a story online just completely flip or a lie take hold before the truth gets its boots on, write me too in the comments. It happens all the time now, right? Acknowledging it is part of that KaiZen thing, building our own defense against bad info.
Exactly. And that manipulated narrative, that political spin, especially the inaccurate leftist label on the suspect, it immediately shifted the government's focus. The assassination became the excuse, the pretext for a big political pushback against dissent. Right. Before they even really knew the motive or had the facts straight about the suspect's background, President Trump weighed in. He blamed it squarely on radical left political violence. And he didn't stop there. He vowed his administration would find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity, including the organizations that fund it. That sounds like a direct threat to opposition groups.
It was definitely heard that way.
Yeah.
And Vice President J.D. Vance immediately picked up that ball and ran with it. He guest hosted Kirk's podcast. And he didn't just condemn the killing. He basically deputized the listeners, told them to call them out and call their employer if they saw anyone celebrating Kirk's death online.
Call their employer. Wow.
Yeah. And crucially, he promised to use the federal government's power to investigate liberal organizations and their funding sources. Connect the dots.
Okay, that set off alarm bells everywhere, right? Free speech groups, legal experts.
Huge alarm bells. They immediately called it out, saying the assassination was being used as a cover to crack down on political opposition. The warnings were stark. When the government actively encourages private citizens to get others fired for their speech, that's moving towards the heart. Well, the term McCarthyism started getting thrown around.
And did it have real consequences? Did people actually get fired?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't just talk. The campaign Vance and others kicked off led to immediate widespread actions. Mass firings, people getting disciplined, harassed.
Yeah.
A real backlash against anyone critical or, frankly, tasteless online.
What are some specific examples from the sources?
Well, a Secret Service agent got put on leave, security clearance pulled, just for a negative Facebook post about Kirk. Think about that, Secret Service. The military branches, Army, Navy, Air Force people, they put out official warnings, basically saying, mock this assassination, celebrate it, and you're facing action. It's against military values.
And Texas seemed particularly aggressive.
Very. Governor Greg Abbott actually called for a student to be expelled for celebrating Kirk's death online. 2 school districts in Texas fired teachers. And there were reports that nearly 300 Texas teachers were under investigation for comments related to Kirk. Even down to retail, an Office Depot worker got fired for refusing to print a poster for a Kirk vigil, apparently calling it propaganda.
Okay, this brings up a really important legal point we need to unpack for listeners. The First Amendment. What speech is actually protected here? Can you mock an assassination?
Legally, generally, yes. Experts pointed this out right away. Mocking, even celebrating, a death, however vile or offensive it is usually protected speech under the First Amendment. The line is typically drawn at inciting